Microphone and camera check. Can you guys hear me well? Let me know in the chat section. Whew, I'm gonna take some water. Hey, thanks for the comment, Benjamin. I actually heard a version of Putin's claims for peace yesterday. They were most conciliatory I have ever heard. Perhaps he's starting to realize that the situation isn't that rosy for Russia. We'll talk a little bit about that, Benjamin. So thanks for your comment. But first, let me know in the chat if you guys can hear me all right. I want to make sure that the technicalities are good and you guys can at least hear me. That's the most important. Okay, seems like sound is good. So hopefully I can start. So, okay, guys, this is going to be a very quick, short live stream. Nothing too long. I want to talk about Trump and his comments on Putin and some of my thoughts about it. So you can let me know in the chat section what you guys think about it. But Trump has kind of shifted his tone towards Putin. And first of all, we're seeing that Trump is forcing Ukraine, his tactic of forcing Ukraine to abandon its resistance has completely failed and backfired against him. And actually, before I continue, thank you, Frakis. Hello, friends. Thank you, Frakis, for coming. Huge thank you. Really appreciate the support you guys give me. But yeah, Trump's policy of forcing Ukraine to just stop fighting and abandon, it failed. And I think he's really starting to realize that. His polls are continuing to go down. We're already seeing that his support is dwindling as the weeks go by. And that is mainly because of the lack of results that is frustrating American people. That is not just because of Ukraine, of course, the economy, world trade, a lot of other internal policies. And Trump has displayed very little results and wins for the American people. So I think that he has more pressure and less capabilities to maneuver and take harsh decisions. I think he also realizes that Russia isn't actually interested in this mega economic deal that Trump really wants from the Russians, right? Like for, I think, months, the Russians were probably very clever at making Trump believe that they have some mega deal just waiting for him. Just wait, and we'll give you these oil fields somewhere in Siberia, and you're going to have access to those oil fields and our mines. That's where we mine diamonds, right? And gold and this and that. And Trump really believed that he has access to trillions of dollars because what interests Trump is money, right? He's Mr. Krabs, literally. But all jokes aside, I think Trump realized that actually, this is not going to happen. And I've explained to you guys why it's never going to happen. The Russians simply don't have a choice. They are working with the Chinese, and Russia is fully dependent on the Chinese. Basically, the Chinese, I read an article today, are responsible for 80%. It says it here in one of the articles, 80% for the circumvention of sanctions. So China is literally working with the Russians, providing the Russians what they absolutely need, the components, the parts, the pieces, even weapons. We know that. Buying Russian resources and essentially funding the Russian war chest. And so Russia is not going to give up that relationship with China to say, oh, we're going to go with Trump now. Like to rebuild these connections, rebuild these trade routes, these contacts with the Americans is going to take forever, for years, if not even longer. They already have those connections with the Chinese government. So I think that basically that is one of the reasons why the Russians would never, ever sign some deal with the Americans, because also it's a huge kind of propaganda defeat for the Russians. For years, they also made the Americans seem like they were the enemy. And then out of nowhere, you're saying, oh, we're now partnering up with the Americans and they're going to start building mines and we're signing deals with the Americans. I think the Russians will be perplexed at this. So there is a lot of reasons why this is never going to happen. And Trump realizing that, well, things are not as rosy as he wanted. it to be with the Russians that, now he needs to shift his position with regards to Ukraine. Basically, you guys can let me know if you guys agree with that, but right now he gets to play the kind of, I didn't know he was like that position. Like, I tried. This is not my fault. Like he's already repeating this so many times. Like, if it wasn't for me, like if I was president back in 2022, then this would have never happened. And he can't be saying that forever as well. Like, you can maybe say that for 2, 3 months, but like imagine if he continues to say the same lines for over a year. It's not my fault. I'm not, it makes him look like a very weak president as well. And image is everything when you're a president. We don't think about it, but you need to look strong. And so if Trump continues to play like, I didn't know, it's also going to impact his polls and popularity without a doubt. I think one thing was really interesting that I saw. It was one of his kind of small little question response period. I think he was on the tarmac, basically where he kind of said that, like, oh, I'm not happy with Putin. I'm not happy with what Putin is doing. He's kind of crazy. He's gone crazy. But he also admitted a lot of things that were interesting. Like he said that, oh, he's killed many people. He's attacking cities and I don't like it. I don't understand what's going on. Like he's literally admitting that Putin, his apparent good friend, is literally a war criminal, attacking cities and killing people. And he's admitting that literally, I think on Fox News or CNN, I don't remember. I think that was kind of telling because like he feels comfortable to have a relationship with a war criminal, whereas other leaders wouldn't even want to have that type of relationship. They wouldn't even want to admit that, yeah, I've spoken to Putin. Like it's, as soon as you speak to Putin, it's kind of like, you're talking to the devil, because it's true. He has millions of lives and so much blood on his hands. Think about the last 25 years and all the destruction that Putin has made. The Chechen wars. Of course, there's Georgia and the instability currently in Georgia. The Syrian civil war, where the Russians assisted in war crimes with the Bashar al-Assad regime. Now Ukraine, for over 10 years, they're killing hundreds of thousands of their own people and also Ukrainian people, or impacting them. He has so many lives that he has impacted and killed, that admitting that, like, I have a great relationship with him is crazy. Like it's like you saying, oh, I have a good relationship with this known rapist that's now should be in prison, but he still walks free. Like it would be crazy to admit that. And so that already indicates that Trump is not shifting his position because it's morally right, or he's like somehow had like a understanding or an epiphany. No, it's just that he sees that this relationship is going nowhere. And let's not forgive him for having tried to force Ukraine to abandon first. He opted for that choice first, and I'll never forgive Trump for that. He's a man that wanted Ukraine to just lose, completely be defeated and allow millions of people possibly to get killed by the Russians, right? If that was to happen, no more US aid, no more assistance, intelligence sharing, forcing Ukraine to agree to those terms, only to come back with another bigger war with the Russians. Like, how disastrous would that be? So thankfully, the Ukrainians are not built like that. They're not built to be bullied by Trump, right? They are fighting so hard for the last 3.5 years. Imagine just living through these conditions of constant ballistic missiles every single day being launched by the Russians. This weekend, they launched over 1,000 missiles and drones combined over different Ukrainian cities. Imagine if that was to happen in Canada or the United States or some European country, God forbid. Like withstanding this psychological pressure is massive, and not many nations are built like Ukraine. So, that's just kind of my comment about that. Let me read some of your comments. Some backing. If Ukraine wasn't a terrorist country against their own citizen, it wouldn't have happened. There is price to being, yeah, well, you're talking like a true little troll, Simba King. And I hope that you're getting paid pretty well by the Kremlin for saying these things, but you should get informed. And you're not going to be fooling anybody here into believing that somehow Ukraine is a terrorist country. Look at the Russians, look at their brutality. And if you're a bot, well, you can't even look. So it doesn't really matter. But I'm not going to even respond to any of these trolls. And instead, I will be removing you from here We don't need you here. And that's really important, is that we also need to be doing this to fight against the trolls. And there's so many of them. Russia's launching a massive bot campaign right now to make it believe like they're winning, like the Russians are going to be victorious. They're not going to be victorious. And these 3.5 years, they've pathetically actually performed, if you think about it, over getting close to 1 million casualties. That's not victory. It's just doom for the Russians as well. And they're trying to take down with them a country that is fully sovereign and has the right to defend itself. And we're seeing right now that the Russians are simply not interested in peace. If they really were, it would be very easy for Putin to call off his military and say, you know what, let's stop this, let's stop the bloodshed. Instead, what we're witnessing is that he's pushing his horses, his donkeys, his disabled, crippled Russian soldiers that are often chained and beaten by their own Russian commanders to go and fight and get just killed. And there's no plan of them ever coming back home alive. If that's the type of society you want to live in, Simba King, you're more than welcome to move to Russia and live with them. And, maybe even get drafted and see for yourself how that happens. Life in Russia. Mm. Another thing I want to talk about is that we have some other great announcements with Germany. And Germany and Zelensky had a great meeting today. And thankfully, we have Germany. A huge thank you to German people and your support. You don't understand how much Ukraine appreciates it. From the great howitzers that Ukraine has received, the Leopard 2s and Leopard 1s, the Taurus missile. I hope those Taurus will come soon to Kiev and then will be transferred to Moscow. That's what we're hoping for. Like what we saw today, overnight, the Ukrainians hit Moscow again. So that is great news. And these Taurus missiles will be flying towards Moscow, Belgorod, St. Petersburg, but not over civilian infrastructure like the Russians like to do, but over key military targets and factories that are helping Putin with this war. And that's what the Ukrainians did last night. They attacked several factories, I think even ammunition depots, microchip factories. That's what the Ukrainians are hitting. That's the right way of doing war. If there is no right way of doing war, but if you're to do this, you want to minimize civilian casualties to the maximum. And we need to be the good guys, and we are the good guys. Ukraine is not attacking people that are sleeping at night and their apartment buildings. That wouldn't then differentiate Russia and Ukraine. And that's really important, that Ukraine needs to continue being a civilized country, as much as it is frustrating to watch the Russians do what they're doing and their brutality and how they don't care about civilian casualties, how they like to torture people, how they like to even torture their own people. Ukraine cannot sink to that level. That's really, really important. We need to be Western. We need to be with a civilized mentality, because otherwise, you know, Ukraine is going to be literally like Russia, and we can't sink to that level. And then everybody's going to be saying, well, Ukraine did that. The Russians are just waiting for that opportunity. Well, you see, Ukrainians clearly are killing prisoners of war. So we have to do this as well. We don't have a choice, right? It was them, and they can easily manipulate. As you're seeing these trolls, these bot farms, Russia is very good at creating them, and then, or even convincing useful idiots their lines and their propaganda that will simply spew whatever the Russians are feeding them. They're very good at that. So basically, Ukraine needs to be fighting on the side of good, and we need to always limit civilian casualties. And this brings me to Mertz and the announcement that they'll do more cooperation with the Ukraine military. He says that also, that is a great announcement by the European leaders. No longer any range restrictions on weapons supplied by Kiev's Western allies. And we know what that means, because the Germans have the Taurus missile. We've been talking about it for so long. But even now, I think that they could play a major role against Russia. The Taurus missiles have a range of 500 kilometers, and it can be extended, I think, up to 600, depending. That has enough range to hit major Russian cities. But we don't want to hit the cities. We want to hit the factories. We want to hit the fuel depots, the ammunition depots, tank storage facilities, bridges, right? Crimea Bridge, possibly. Then we also have airfields, military airfields that the Russians are using. Oh, how can I forget the refineries who have been burning very well in Russia? And I think that, that is always another great possibility. With drones, it already had a big impact. Imagine with Taurus missiles that I think can carry over a payload of 500 pounds, if I remember correctly. That is a massive payload that is very destructive. So, in my opinion, this is a massive announcement between Ukraine and Germany. No more restrictions on long range weapons and also more military cooperation. Germany is the top weapons manufacturer right now in Europe, right? Rheinmetall is literally kind of the best of the best in Europe. And they've realized that they have an opportunity right now to rebuild their manufacturing because for the last 30 years in Europe, let's face it, there's been a demilitarization. European countries kind of said, why do we have to pay for the military and defense when we have the US? And that has backfired against Europe as well. And I think they're starting to realize that Ukraine is this opportunity for them. They can cooperate. Ukrainians can also produce weapons for Germany and vice versa. And this is going to remilitarize very quickly Europe. Ukraine is kind of the door for that, for the remilitarization of Europe. Let's face it, like right now, France, Germany, the UK are signing lots of deals with Ukraine because they realize that they have the production, they have the know how to. Just look at the drones, the missiles, the innovations that Ukraine has made in the last few years. Ukraine is that opportunity for Europe to rearm and assume its own defense rather than depending on the US. Frakis, I agree 100%, Chris. Ukrainians have shown unbelievable resilience. Thank you. And I appreciate your comment. And I agree as much as you agree with me. Paul Gude Deberitz. Now the Muscovites are starting to understand that the war is returning home. Germany did a great job in electing Merz. Yes. And it's fully, it's very true, Paul. I think that even in the videos that I saw yesterday of this Ukrainian drone attack over Moscow and several other cities around Moscow region, you could see the fear and panic in these Telegram videos by the Russians recording these Ukrainian drones flying. And that's one thing that shocked me is that they were unprepared, kind of scared. They weren't sure what to do. So it has a massive psychological effect on the Russians because the Ukrainians don't want to be really targeting, remote Russian regions. They want to be targeting regions where there is a concentration of middle-class Russians, the ones that don't want to fight the war. Like there is that class of Russians that are kind of isolated in their bubble, and that is Moscow. There is St. Petersburg. There's other large cities in Russia, Yekaterinburg. You have Kazan. You have Vladivostok. You have what else? Well, Belgrade, not so much anymore. Kursk. These are two kind of smaller cities. They're very close to the front line. I think they realize. But Moscow is kind of this elite city. You go there to not worry about war. And there's drones flying here and there, explosions happening, airports being closed. That has an impact. Trust me, guys. Putin doesn't want the capital to feel like they're tense, right? That every single day there could be a strike somewhere in Moscow. And that's really important. I want to stress that. And so if Ukraine has more long-range capabilities, more drones, more long-range missiles, that, of course, puts the pressure on the Kremlin to end the war 100%. Hi, Chris. Thank you, Sir Shroom, for coming. Really appreciate it. As I said, I'm not going to make this stream very long, so I'm going to maybe keep another 10 minutes-ish because I want to talk about, the Ukrainian strikes over Russia. That's kind of the last topic. And also maybe possibly a little bit about the Russian offensive that has essentially started, the summer offensive. And this is the last one for the Russians. I really believe it. The Russians in 2026 are not going to be able to continue with this intensity. If we're already seeing donkeys and horses and Russians being chained and using disabled, crippled Russians, they're walking on kind of those crutches or even wheelchairs. They're very close to the end. At least that's my opinion. Within next year, I think Putin will try to find a way out of this. So basically, Russia said that overnight they repelled a record-breaking drone attack, destroying nearly 300 Ukrainian drones across multiple regions, including near their capital. The strike forced Moscow to close its major airports temporarily. That's been happening very often now for the last few weeks, pretty much once a week since I think April in Moscow. They had to close down the airport because of some drone activity. So that's really significant. The large scale drone barrage came just after Ukraine endured its most intense wave of Russian airstrikes since the start of the invasion. Kiev said Russia launched nearly 1,000 drones and missiles between Saturday and Monday, unfortunately killing civilians, including 3 children. Um, but the drones from Ukraine that attacked Russia were reported over the Moscow region and 13 different areas, also Bryansk, Belgorod, Vladimir, Voronezh, Ivanovo, Kaluga, Kursk, Ryazan, Smolensk, Tver, and Tula. A lot of different regions. And there's a lot of activity now. Ukraine has those capabilities as well. So basically, in long story short, the strikes that were successful by the Ukrainians were mainly at basically important. Uh, there was a techno park that was hit, likely helping the Russian military with the design of chips or certain components. There was also some factories that were microchip factories. I think one was hit by a drone. So the Ukrainians are really aiming for those important targets because they know they're assisting the Russians with this war. Live, perfect. I don't think it's realistic, but we Scandinavians should liberate all Viking lands currently under Muscovite occupation. Interesting, and I'm just not really knowledgeable enough with the islands that you're talking about. So if you can clarify, Paul, that'll be interesting. Would it be more in the Baltics or kind of the northern Arctic part that you consider to be Scandinavian lands? But yeah, again, it makes me think like Russia has so much territory. Why do they need to keep claiming more? They're literally the largest country in the world. Like this is a disease almost. It's an illness when you're just so hungry for more. Like Russia has nothing to complain about. It should be literally, if you think about it, the world leader in everything, in the economy, resource management. Like, yeah, sure, part of the Russian majority of Russia is just barren land, remote, but there's a lot of like really, and that's where we're seeing most of the Russians that live in Russia live in the west, to the Urals, the Siberian parts of Russia. That's just pure taiga, tundras, and the Arctic. But they shouldn't be complaining, right? Like, you have enough territory. What do you need more? What do you need to attack Ukraine? And that's because the Kremlin is a regime that's built on fear, lies, and aggression, right? For them, kind of keeping everybody under control is to have wars against others to prove that you're better than everybody else. Brute force. Chris, the founders of Novgorod and Kiev were Vikings, Varangians, traders and raiders along the rivers that settled the married locals. Yeah. Well, by that definition, then you could also, say that, we also have Baltics are part of our territory. I agree with you that you could go back in history and say, this is ours, this is, but like, I think we need to avoid this kind of as much as we can, these kind of conversations if we're going back like centuries. If of course it's recent, like we're talking about Ukraine, Russia, this is being decided right now. Like what Ukraine wants, it's its sovereignty from 1991, the sovereign territories. But we start going back too much in history and say, oh well, this was part of this, and this is ours, and so we're going to take it back. If there's a diplomatic way of doing it, that's awesome, but we need to avoid conflicts and wars that kind of continue this process of, this is mine and I believe it was mine, so I'll take it back kind of through force. We want to avoid wars as much as possible, but sometimes they have to happen, unfortunately. Like you're seeing the Russians wanted the war and they attacked Ukraine and they said, what, Ukraine is ours, right? And so they just attacked and thinking that they had the forces to win against Ukraine. But there was a diplomatic way out. Maybe they could be some concessions if the Russians really wanted it. They really wanted to talk with the Ukrainians and say, like, we don't agree with this position. Of course, that's ridiculous to think that the Russians would be capable of that. But at least having some sort of decency and having a genuine conversation, being honest and truthful. But when have the Russians ever been like that, especially the Kremlin? When have they even once been truthful and held their word? That trust us, this is not going to happen. We're going to Really? You think Putin works like that? He's an FSB agent, and everybody around him are master liars and propagandists that can double talk, can use fallacies, and they don't care. They're masters at that. Unfortunately, it's very hard to match these types of people because they don't care about the rules and ethics and morality. Yeah. So basically, also the last point I want to make is that Russia also essentially Putin has announced this new offensive that they're supposed to have, and I really believe this is going to be the last one for the Russians, as I've said. And the Ukrainians are reporting a lot more activity towards the center of Pokrovsk, and I've talked about it in my previous video, so you guys can check it out because honestly, not much has changed on the map. But the Russians are doubling down instead of trying to open a new front. They might still want to do that. Let's say around Sumy, where they have a lot of activity. I've seen a lot of drone activity in Sumy region, the border between Kursk and Sumy in Ukraine. I think the Russians are still trying to find an opening there. And you can tell it's Sumy because there's a lot of dragon's teeth where the Russians and the Ukrainians have built a lot of these defensive lines. So in that region, there's a lot of activity. So possibly that could be one front line. And another would be, again, around the Pokrovsk area where they're having some limited success at gaining ground in that region, but very limited. And again, at massive casualties for the Russians. Of course, the other side of the coin is that Ukraine also, without a doubt, the Russians are adjusting. They have drone capabilities as well, with even them using donkeys and horses and, seeing some truly horrific things on their side. They also have very competent, experienced soldiers, right? This is kind of like the first line that they're throwing, kind of this first meat wave, but they also have very experienced soldiers that then they throw after they've thrown like 20 waves of disposable soldiers, unfortunately, and then the experienced teams come in when they feel like there's a little bit more openness. So the Russians are good at that tactic. We can't just say that the Russians haven't adapted, and that's just part of the war, right? Both sides are literally fighting each other brutally. And so that's kind of allowing the Russians, by using tons of disposable soldiers, to get a little bit of ground. But we're seeing how that slows down month by month for the Russians. Like the type of gains that we saw since 2022, they've considerably been reduced, right? And even Bakhmut back in 2023. Then we looked at what was the Avdiivka, of course, for months. And I think that by this stage, the Russians don't have much left to capture another big city that they're hoping for, if you're looking at the way things have been developing. So Ukraine's job is to continue to try to deter the Russians, maintain more or less of the line. It's not going to be perfect. There's going to be a lot of movement, mainly for the Russians as they're increasing their intensity. They're willing to throw even more right now. But I think that's going to stop eventually by the end of this year. And I think that Putin knows that time is very short for him. For him, it's a matter of how can I, have a quick win right now, because he can be going for another fourth or fifth year. They've talked about, oh, we can do this for 21 years, like in the Northern War with Sweden. But in reality, it's not the same. It's comparing apples to oranges. Right now, we're a globalized world, right? Like countries are dependent on one another. Look at how Russia's dependent on China for support. Russia isn't as independent as it was back in the 18th century and even before that. Right now, Russia is extremely dependent on a lot of things. And to maintain this type of war, they're deeply in need of North Korean weapons, of Iranian also assistance and weapons, Chinese support. So the Russians can't be pretending that they can be doing this forever, because I generally don't believe that. Personally, looking at all the trends and the economy for the Russians, they have until early 2026 to put an end to this. And, that gives them a few months to capture the entirety of Donbass. I seriously doubt it that they'll be able to do that, as the Ukrainians also have their own capabilities and they have their own drones. They also have their own missiles. And as I've said previously, Ukraine has been attacking Russia over the last months with their own drones and missiles, and it's been pretty effective, right? So that's very significant. So that's the live stream for today, guys. So just some of my comments about Trump, about his comments being buddy buddy with Putin first, and then saying now that he's gone crazy. Does that mean that Trump is finally waking up? I think partially, but it's not for the right reasons. And I think he's doing it because there's too much pressure on him. The Americans, as I've shared with you guys, want to continue supporting Ukraine. the vast majority, around 60 to 65% of the Americans want that. And so they're realizing that Trump is just simply not applying the right policy right now of being buddy buddy with Putin, and forcing Ukraine to back down is not an effective solution. So I think that he will increase sanctions of Putin in a few weeks. Possibly, he might as well even provide weapons to Ukraine. So sell certain weapons the Ukrainians wanted, announce a package for Ukraine. I hope that could be a possibility. However, that doesn't mean that he's not going to give a quick win to Putin. I think even if he was to do that, increase sanctions on Russia, he'll say, "Oh, I'm too pro-Ukrainian right now, so I need to give a quick win to Putin." And then he tags Zelensky and says something, on Truth Social, that Zelensky is a massive dictator, it's his fault, blah blah blah. So I wouldn't say that this is going to be pro-Ukrainian Trump as of now. He'll still try to throw a few wins to Putin. So let's not be disillusioned about that. He's not pro-Ukraine. He's just doing it because he realized that if he doesn't, his support goes down, because the Americans are showcasing that they're not about that. They're not about supporting a dictator that has millions of lives under his belt that he has killed. So, yeah, guys, thank you for joining this live stream. Very thankful. I hope you guys enjoyed it. You let me know in the chat section what you guys think about Trump's comments, Russia and the summer offensive that is kickstarting, and their capabilities, and also Germany and their Taurus missiles being provided to the Ukrainian people, hopefully in a few days or in a few weeks. And these Taurus missiles then flying towards, where? The important facilities and military targets in Russia. So with all that, thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and Slava Ukraini.